So today's lesson is we're going to be using UI and scene management to set up functionality for our existing game. And you can pick this to be in the space shooter that you have right now or the platformer that you have. The whole goal is that we want to be able to create a main menu screen and then a pop-up menu, both of which are going to have really similar functionality. If you understand to do one, then there's some tweaks that you do for the other, and that's mainly in the pop-up when we want to bring up that menu while you're in game by pressing a certain button, maybe escape. But the goal is that the main menu is going to have a couple options. One is going to be start the game and then look at our credits scene, and we're going to go through all of those start to finish. If you don't have a menu screen or a credits scene, then we're going to create all those right now. Okay, and understanding how to do these steps is going to help you fulfill the assignment for this week. Cool. Let me just make sure that this recording is going on. Let me jump over to my QuickTime, see if that's working. I think it is. So let's just continue. So right now, let's assume that this is my level scene. This is what it looks like. Really, really boring. It's not fleshed out like yours is in class. But let's say that we want to create a new scene. We understand how to do that. We're going to go to create and we're going to go to scene. And let's just name this main menu. And we're going to open it up. It's going to be blank. I'm going to split this view so that once we're dealing with UI, I like to see both the scene and the game view. And I want to make sure that I'm selecting the game deployment dimensions. That way the UI looks all the same. When we create a new scene, of course, there's only one object traditionally by default. That's the main camera, excuse me. And let's start out by making the main UI canvas. This canvas is going to store all of the visuals that we have for the main menu. Let's just zoom out and center it so that we can see where things are. And we can start to add some things. Make sure that the canvas is set to screen space overlay. And let's just drag in a couple things just for niceness. Let's say that this game has a Mario object in it. Let's drag it into the canvas by going to create UI image, and there's a blank box, and let's just drag in an image that we think is going to be, that's good. If it looks kind of funny, there's a couple ways you can fix this. You can either square it or make it look correct by the way that it's sized, or when you're using an image you can select the preserve aspect. It should bring it back to its original dimensions, relative dimensions. Let's resize this thing just a little bit. Put something like that. Maybe we'll make another image for our main menu. And let's say it's image again. And we'll throw in the mushroom image. Let's resize it. And let's name it something. Maybe there's already a game with the same name. But let's give it a title. Let's go to UI, go to Text Mesh Pro, and if you haven't already, then import the essentials. Go ahead and do that, I guess. That's fine. And we'll have our text, and let's just give it a title. Let's call it Mario. I'm sure there's all these. Walk fast. Don't want to give it a title that already exists in the real world. We'll call it centered. Maybe we'll make it bigger. Make it bold and italicized. There's other things that you can add on here, like gradients and stuff like that. I'll let you guys figure that out. We don't need that for this assignment. But let's just move this around a little bit. Here's our game title. Some spacing. If you wanted to all sit in nicely, something like this, then we can create a portion section of this UI. I'm going to make it a subsection called, and organize it within a panel. And this panel can be something like this. And then all the other things can live inside that panel, like this text. So if the panel were to be moved, then those things move along with it. And that panel has obviously a fill to it, and we can get rid of that fill. We can turn that transparency all the way down. Then with this canvas, if we want to, then we can also give it a panel that's separate, because we want to maybe have a fill, and drag it to the top of this guy so that this gets rendered first before everything else. And let's give it a certain color. Great. Okay, so now that we have a title, within this panel, let's give ourselves some options, and those options that you have to fulfill the assignment is UI text. Oh no, let's go UI button text mesh pro. This first button should be something like start game. Each button, UI button, no matter if it's a text mesh pro button or UI regular version, is going to have a button portion to it. You can look at an inspector, one that controls the visual aspect of it, that maybe this is a colorful button with some textures to it, a pattern, anything like that. And there's the button functionality that allows you to change color if you're pressing it, highlighting over it, and then ultimately what happens when you click. And then as a child of that element, you can control what the text is, and it's usually a child of the button parent. And so we can change the text here, and we can say that this is going to be start, and maybe we want to sort of match the style of everything else here, and increase the size. Don't want it bigger than the title, something like that. Cool. And maybe we'll have another button, and we're going to change the text inside of it, and this is going to be credits. Let's slide things around. Oops, not that one. I want to move the child, the parent of this button, the whole button itself, and make sure they line up. I can see the X position of this one, and I'm just going to paste it on here. Oh, good, they're both the same one. Again, let's balance things out visually. Something like that. Maybe bring the title down just a tad. Great. Okay. Cool. So now we have two buttons. They don't do anything. One thing that you'll see that appeared after we started adding the canvas is this thing called the event system. The event system handles player input and allows you to control certain UI elements using the keyboard, and helps drive the event system's input when we use things like mouse and traditional left and right keyboard button actions. But what that allows too is, right now I'm using my mouse to control things. Let's say that in the game you want the user to use arrows to select things on here. In order to make that happen, you need to tell the event system what the first selected possible item could be. That doesn't mean that it's the thing that's going to happen, but it's going to be the one that the mouse is going to move over to be the first option when your scene loads. In this case, maybe the start button should be the first selected option, and we're going to select that over. You notice that it's kind of confusing because that says button. Why don't we go over to our buttons and rename them so that it gives us some more information. This is going to be our start button, and this is going to be our credits button. Now when we go over to other objects, we can see which one these things are. Let's go ahead and save this if we haven't done that already, and let's see what that looks like when we have these event systems set up. You can see that in this event system, if I press up or down, it lets me know which one I have selected, and if I press space, you'll notice that this credits one lights up because I'm selecting that one. Let's change a couple things. Let's go to our buttons, and we can do both of them and change it so that when they are pressed, it's an obvious color change, and maybe when we have it selected, it's something more dark. Cool. So we just changed the pressed and the selected options. Normally they're going to be the normal color, which is more white. And you'll notice that when I have this selected, the gray one is the one that I have essentially highlighted over, and when I hit the space bar, it lets me know when I click on that. This is nice to give you some more visual feedback, and of course you can change the colors however you want. When we select these things, they don't do anything because we don't have that set up yet. That's the next part of our to-do list. We have to create a we have to make our own scene management functionality. One of the things we understand is that these three things I've highlighted down here. In order to be able to load a different scene in Unity, Unity needs to be aware of these individual scenes. And in order to make it aware of these individual scenes, we need to go to the Build Settings window and then add scenes that we want to use in our game in the Scenes in Build window. Let's do that first. So we're going to go to our Build Settings, go to Edit, Auto File, Build Settings. It's going to bring up a window, and we'll notice that in this area, Scenes in Build, there's only one scene in it, and that's the level 1. That was the one that already existed, our platformer. And since then we've created a second one. We can just simply drag that new scene into the window, and we can put it in front of the other one if we want to. Let's say that we put it like that. We can rearrange the order. And one thing to note is it's aware of the folder that sits in, and it's the name of the file here. And then there's also an index. This is the first index 0, second index is 1, and we can load scenes based on the name or the index of these scenes. So right now we have one scene, or two scenes, and since we're in the main menu, we want to be able to pull up the level 1, and then we should be able to call the credits scene. So let's save this so far. The build settings is aware of 2 scenes. Let's make a third scene. We can duplicate this main menu and alter it just a little bit. We'll call it credits scene. How did I duplicate it? I just selected that option, that object, and hit duplicate. On a Mac, it's Command D. You can go to Edit and hit duplicate as well. It does the same thing. I'm going to load up the credits scene. We can see the name of the scene that we've loaded in the hierarchy right here, so that there's no confusion. Let's just change some of these elements so that it visually makes sense to what we're seeing. So this is Mario Walk Fast. Let's just call this credits here. Let's eliminate some of these buttons. Let's eliminate the credits button because obviously the credits menu doesn't need a credits button to take it back to itself. Let's rename this button to be main menu button. Maybe this button should take us back to the main menu when we're in credits. And let's move this button down here because the whole point of the credits is to display some credits text. So let's go to Create UI, Text Mesh Pro. Let's move this guy over here. Let's rename it credits text. And let's just give it some names. Let's say Joey, Monica, and Chandler. They all worked on this game. And let's make it center aligned. Move this guy. Nope. Move the credits text over here. And maybe just change the background of this panel. Great. Now it's really obvious if we load individual scenes, the first main menu is this one. Credit scene looks like this. We load up here. We know which scenes we're in now. Perfect. So let's go back to the main menu and let's make some functionality. What I traditionally like to do is I don't like to slap on any scripts on the canvas of objects. I like to keep them separate. Maybe kind of weird like that because the canvas is the visual end and I want to have logic sit separately from things. So I should create an empty object and we're going to call this the scene SceneController object. Beware of calling things Scene Manager because Scene Manager is a namespace that Unity has is using, and you might get errors if you use the same keywords that they do. So we have this object called SceneController. It doesn't have anything visual to it, only holds some scripts, and we're going to create a new script and we're going to call this SceneController. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to rename some of these things because I noticed that everyone that watches my videos names everything the same way, and when you have an error importing things, and it messes things up. And so let's just rename. I'm going to rename things, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but for the sake of cleanliness and headache that I'm trying to prevent, I'm going to rename things week 7 SceneController, and you don't necessarily need to have that for your stuff. And I'm going to rename mine week 7 main menu. Just want to make sure that when I'm helping you guys out, I'm not losing your material or my material. Cool, so all my stuff says week 7 _ something. Great. We have the SceneController object, and on it is the week 7 SceneController script. I'm going to open it up. Great. Watch out when you name things with a dash. Unity doesn't like that. You'll notice that the blue IntelliSense goes kind of bonkers when it has just a dash. So use underscores if you have to use any sort of separation, or otherwise just try to avoid it. So in order for using some functionality in loading and unloading scenes, there's a few things we want to make sure is happening. Let's go back to my hints. And whenever we're dealing with unloading and loading scenes, we want to make sure that we're telling Unity that we want to be accessing some code that already exists, and we want to use this using Unity.SceneManagement in the header up here. So we'll say using Unity engine.SceneManagement. This is number 1. If we don't have that, then we can't load and unload scenes. Great. So from here we can, what do we want to do? We want to be able to do a couple things. We want to be able to, number 1, load a particular scene. And there's a couple ways to do that, right? We can call, there's some easy ways to do this. I'll give you a demonstration. So we're going to say void, public void. These buttons are going to be calling a specific thing, and so they're going to call these methods that we create. Public void load scene with a lowercase l. And we want to be able to feed it 2 things. Remember in the build settings, we had these scenes that we created both by their name and index. We can call the scenes that we want to load up by either their scene name or their index. And that's really handy because sometimes you have a bunch that can get really confusing. So you should do it the way that you like. And we can write it by feeding it a certain index if we want to. In order to make that happen, this button is going to access this load scene function, and we need to have the button give you an index. But from there, we need to access this namespace that Unity has already written out, the functionality that lets us load and unload scenes. We're going to type out SceneManager.load scene with a capital L. This is code that they've written. And in order to use this functionality, as you start typing it out, it's going to tell you that, oh, you're going to use this pre-existing Scene Manager class. And in this class, there's this capital L load scene method. It takes an integer, and the integer should refer to the scene build index. Remember, in this view here, the number over here refers to the build index. So if we wanted to load up this first level 1, we need to feed it an index 1. That's super handy. So what we can do is we can just type in this index like this, and you'll see what I mean in a second. The other method that we can use, and it looks just like this, is that we can also give it a name, and we can send this load scene not just a number, but the scene name that we want to have it load. In this case, my level 1 is called week 7 underscore level 1. Cool. Let's go back to the script. So right now we have two functions that are called load scene. We're able to do that because they're taking different types of parameters. Normally you can't really do that. But this number 1 loads a particular scene by build index. Number 2, this is load a particular scene by scene name. And scene name uses a string. Uses string. Use quotes. Other than that, we're almost good to go. Another common usage that we might have is, let's say that we're on level 1. We don't necessarily want to use this. Maybe we can get the index of the current scene that's loaded. And how do we do that? Let's just create a private integer, and we're going to call this current scene index. This is just meant to hold a value that's an integer, and we're going to update this value when this scene loads on awake. So once this scene loads, we can grab the index of our current scene. How do we do that? We're going to update the value by using the scene manager dot get active scene. Get active scene, and then we can get the build index. Cool. So what does this do? This says updates the current scene variable with the index of the current loaded scene. What's nice about this is then once we have the number of the scene, let's say that's level 1, if we have a level 2, then we can have a method that's called load next scene. And we don't need to feed it any parameters because it already knows the current scene index, and we just need to add 1 to it. So we can just tell the scene manager to load the scene, and that refers to whatever number that we're on right now. We're going to add 1 to it, and that'll load that scene. Cool. All of these are public methods, so that means other objects can access these methods. If we made them private, then they would not be able to see these methods and would not be able to call them. In order for UI objects to call these methods, they need to be public. This one is awake because it's looking onto itself, and we don't want other objects to be calling this awake on this particular script. So at our disposal, we have a load scene that we can use the index or the scene name, and then we can also say whatever scene that we're on right now, load the next one. Cool. So let's go back to our UI menu, and this is our main menu, and let's select the first option, the start button. And in order to make this all work, we're going to use the on-click event. Right now this list is empty, and basically the interaction is going to call one of these methods that we wrote when we click that button. How do we make that work? We're going to hit plus, and there's two things that need to have happen. This button needs to know where the functionality lives, and then secondly, what is the method or the function that we want to call. So the first one is, where does our script live, this one that we wrote? Is it on the canvas or is it on a separate object? As you recall, it should be on our SceneController. It's this script that we wrote, so we need to point that start button to our SceneController. The logic is on this other object. It's separate from the UI. Once we've pointed the onClick event to the where the script is, then we can show it or point to it which method we want to have happen. We'll click on this drop-down menu and select the script that we have, and then within that we can select the load scene. It knows that this load scene wants a integer or a string, and if we select the one with the integer, we're going to have this box that appears that we can change the value to say, oh, we want to load scene index 1. If we select this other one that's the scene load scene with the string, then we need to type out the scene name, whatever you call the scene name. Make sure that you have it in quotes. And let's just keep it with here with 1. Simpler because I don't need to type that out. If I type it wrong, then it's not going to load the correct one. I know that my first scene that I want to load to start my game is in the build settings, and that refers to level 1 there. I'll take this moment right now to drag in my credits scene. Now I have 3 scenes. I can go to my credits button, do the same thing. Again, I'm going to the button and selecting the onClick. It's asking for where the script that we're trying to use the function at. Make sure that we're not dragging from the project folder, because when we load the game there's no real instance of it. We want to find something that's in the scene, and again the script is on the SceneController, so we drag in the SceneController here. It finds the SceneController script, and then we can select the method that we want to call, or the function that we want to call. In this case we want to again call load scene. And it's easier for me to remember that the credits are on index 2. I'll save that. And then I think we're good to go. So we can hit play and we'll start out here. We can use the mouse or the keyboard. I want to test out this start here. It immediately took us to our level 1 scene, and that's great. Once I get out of play, it takes me back to the scene that I started on. Let's try the credits. If I hit credits, then it brings out the credits scene. Woo. Cool. So that does the main bulk of our assignment. Now it's just making small adjustments so that our credits scene takes us back to our main menu. In order to do that, then we could we could easily come to our main menu and call this SceneController one of our prefabs. Or we could just duplicate it or copy the same thing. It's only one script, so it could be just easily remade. One way to do this is, let's just make a folder called prefabs. Again, you don't need to have a folder to make a prefab, but it's easier for organization's sake. Realize that if you make a prefab, then all instances of this prefab are essentially duplicates of itself. So if you change this script on this scene, it's also going to be changed in the other scene. Just be aware of that. So let's go back into our other scene. And this is our credit scene, and we want to add functionality to take us back to the main menu. Let's just drag in the SceneController here, and then point the button that we have on our canvas, our main menu button. Do the same thing. We're going to add plus, and we're going to select the SceneController. We're going to select the SceneController script, and then which method that we want to use. In this case, it's going to be load scene index, and we know that it hasn't changed even though we've loaded other scenes that are inside our build settings. The index for our main menu is 0. So we can just feed in the value 0 here, and it should take us back to our main menu. Excellent. Now, we're nearly done. We want to write the functionality so that when we're in the game, we have the option to take ourselves back to the main menu when we're in the game. This is really similar to what we've done before. Let's get out of play and go into our main game scene, the level 1. Yeah, let's hit save. We want to save our changes. In this case, this is going to be pretty nice. let's see, what's the best way to do this? We're going to drag in our scene controller here. And we're going to drag in, no, we're not going to drag in, we're going to select a canvas. Make sure it's screen space overlay. And we're just going to duplicate a few things. Make sure that we have the canvas selected. We're going to have UI, and we're going to have Text Mesh Pro, and we're going to say something like game paused. Center it, make it big, stretch out this text box so it's all one line, center it again. Oftentimes in your paused games we want to fade out or make this the typical view more opaque, and we can go to the canvas and create a panel to do that really easily. Make sure that the panel is near the top so that it gets rendered first. Let's change the color so it makes things more opaque. Change the alpha level so it goes out like this. Maybe we want to see a little bit of it. Perfect. Canvas paused. Now let's bring in some options for what the user can do. Let's go and we're going to add a button, and let's make it a little bigger, pull it to the middle. And let's say that this button, let's call it the main menu button. In the middle of the text is going to be main menu, and make it bigger. Oh, I made this regular UI text. You can make a regular UI if you want to. I like the Text Mesh Pro. Let's go to UI button, Text Mesh Pro, call it main menu button. And add some text. Change the text to be main menu. Highlight it, make it big, italicize it. We can resize this, resize the button itself, not just the text. Resize the button. Make sure that the text is maybe auto-sized. Great. We're pretty happy with that. Let's select the button again. Let's add the functionality. We should be doing this a few times just to get our fingers used to what's going on. That's half the point of this assignment, to get ourselves to do it repeatedly so that we can remember it in the future. Go to onClick and hit plus. We gotta tell it where the functionality that we want to have, and that is in the SceneController object that we made a prefab. Drag it in there, and we're looking for that week 7 script. And we're gonna call a certain scene again by index. It's easier than typing out the whole name of the scene. In this case, it's going to be 0 again. Let's test this one out. Should take us back to the main menu. It does. Great. Now, we don't want the level to start with this canvas to be overlaying things. We want this to be able to pop up in and out, right? That was part of our goals here, is that display the options when user presses a certain button. So let's go back to this guy, canvas. Cool. We have this canvas that we know that we can activate and deactivate, and then when it's not deactivated, well, we shouldn't be there at all. We shouldn't even be able to think about it, but we want to be able to call this up when when we hit a certain button. There's a couple ways to do this. This canvas is a UI type of element, and this canvas as a whole is a game object, and so we can either deactivate the canvas itself, this is the canvas object, or we can deactivate the canvas game object. The difference between these two things, let me just note here, is that game object, we can control game objects by using the set active to be either true or false method. And with the canvas object, this canvas object is actually a UI thing. We can use the enabled to be either false or true. Note the difference. One is taking the Boolean as a parameter, the other one is a value you set. So let's do it both, okay, so that you can get this under your hands. We're going to create another object. Again, the canvas is a visual element, and we want to write logic, and I like to keep those things separate, so let's make a UI manager object. In the long run, believe me that you're going to save yourself a lot of headaches by keeping these things separate. So we're going to create a new script. We're going to call this week 7 UI manager. This script, of course, should not have any spaces. Give it a second. We'll load this up in Visual Studio. There's the script. This should be a really short script. As we are breaking things up and getting used to doing that, our script should be relatively shorter and shorter. If we want to be able to turn things on and off like we said over here, we need to have a reference for the type of object. In this one case is a game object, the other case is a canvas. In order to talk to or deactivate one or the other, we need to have a reference variable for that object. To make this happen, we will have either a game object, and we're going to call this canvas object. And we can, in order to get the reference, we can find it by name. Probably the most easiest way is to be able to pull it in the inspector, and we'll go serialize field private. Save this, pop over to our UI manager. We can see that that field is empty, and we can drag in that canvas object right into that guy. Great. Now we've set up a reference to this thing. Once this game, once the level loads, we want to make sure that this canvas object is deactivated, so we don't see it right when the level loads, right? So we should go to start, and we're going to say that this canvas object, just like we mentioned over here, is going to be using the setActive function. So we can say, oh, canvas object dot setActive, and we're going to make sure that it's false right when the level loads. Let's save that and check it out. This thing should disappear. Yes, great. We can see that it's grayed out over here, and you can see if we turn it on, we can manually turn it on, but that's still using that setActive method. Cool, so it automatically turns off. Let's just make a comment here. Automatically set the canvas inactive when scene loads. And then we want to be checking from when we hit a certain button to turn or set the canvas back to active. We'll write our own function here. Or say, oh no, we'll just write it there, we're really lazy. Say if input dot get key down. Let's set a certain key code. Let's go here and make a serialized field. Private key code, and let's say that this is going to be the options menu button, or button key. Let's call it key. Options menu key. And if we press a certain button, get key down, we're going to say that if we press that menu key, then we want to bring up that canvas object. And in order to make this happen, nope, that should be good, I think. I think so. Let's try it. So we just go canvas objects, or that took me so long to think about it. We want to set the active state to be the canvas objects dot active state, the opposite of it. Right? Can we grab this? This is saying, oh, it's obsolete. Oh, we use active self. Let's see if it tells us what the active self is. We want to use the opposite of its active self. If it's, doesn't like that syntax. I thought it does. This gets the local active self state. Cool. Let's do it like that. Let's try that. So what it does is it finds a canvas's active self state. It's either going to be true or false. And if it's true, then we're going to take the opposite of it by using this operator, this bang operator, to say that if it's true, then we're going to make it false, and then we're going to set it to be the opposite of whatever it is. Cool. So let's go to UI Manager. Let's set the options menu to be, option menu key to be something like escape or tab. Let's just try tab because I can't find escape. Let's hit play. Should be off automatically, and let's hit tab. Beautiful. Every time I hit tab, it goes on or off. And from there, we can hit main menu, takes us to that. Of course, that options menu doesn't exist anywhere else. It only exists in our level. But now we're able to jump in and out of the other scenes that we're at. Hopefully this is enough for you guys to go back and review, and it gets you from zero to finish for this week's assignment. Look out for an accompanying assignment where I'm talking about more in-depth things that are optional for this week's assignment, but this thing should get you all the way through. If you have any questions, please contact me. I hope to be in class on Wednesday. See you. Bye.